All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into what is arguably the ultimate macroeconomic trade-off. We are talking about the incredibly delicate, often frustrating balance between keeping inflation low and keeping people employed. So if you've ever found yourself wondering why central banks sometimes make these seemingly painful, counterintuitive choices, well, you're in the right place. We're going to break it all down. And to set the stage, listen to this quote from Nobel laureate George Akerlof. When he received his prize back in 2001, he said, "Probably the single most important macroeconomic relationship is the Phillips curve." And honestly, he wasn't exaggerating. This curve is literally the lens through which modern economies are steered. It's basically the heartbeat of macroeconomic policy.
Here's a quick look at our agenda for today. We'll start with a discovery, move on to the policy menu, explore the vertical reality, check out expectations and shocks, and then wrap things up with the cost of curing inflation.
Okay, part one, the discovery. Every great economic theory has an origin story, right? This one starts with an economist named A.W. Phillips. He painstakingly combed through nearly a century of data in the UK, from 1861 all the way to 1957. Then, in 1958, he published this landmark article where he uncovered a fascinating pattern that hadn't really been mathematically proven before. He found a distinct negative correlation between the rate of unemployment and wage inflation. And it didn't take long for it to catch on. Just 2 years later, in 1960, legendary economists Paul Samuelson and Robert Solow adapted these findings for the U.S., essentially cementing the idea that inflation and unemployment were forever linked.
So here's what that original short-run Phillips curve actually looks like. It illustrates this super clear mathematical trade-off. See, years with low unemployment tend to have high inflation, sitting way higher up on the axis. And conversely, years with high unemployment see low inflation, sliding further along the bottom. At the time, it looked incredibly predictable. I mean, it suggested this reliable relationship, but could practically be used as an instruction manual for national policy.
Which brings us perfectly to part two, the policy menu. Imagine you're a policymaker back in the 60s, armed with this shiny new curve. You'd probably start looking at that downward slope as a literal menu of choices for the economy. Behind the scenes, we know this is driven by aggregate demand, which is basically just total spending in the economy. If you use your policy tools to stimulate demand, total output grows. To make more stuff, companies need more workers, which lowers unemployment. Sounds great, right? But the catch, the cost of that growth, is rising prices. You are actively pushing the economy right up along that short-run curve.
But this tantalizing, seemingly perfect short-run illusion prompts a really critical, high-stakes question. Is this downward-sloping relationship actually a stable reality? Like, can we rely on it forever? Can a government simply choose to permanently accept, say, 6% inflation, just to guarantee that unemployment never ever rises above 4%?
Let's answer that in part three, the vertical reality.
Flash forward to 1968. Economists Milton Friedman and Edmund Phelps stepped in and basically dropped a bomb on this whole policy menu idea. They introduced what's called the natural rate hypothesis. They made the bold claim that unemployment will always eventually return to its normal or natural rate, completely regardless of what inflation is doing.
So, let's compare the two. Yes, in the short run, the trade-off is absolutely real. You can manipulate that downward-sloping curve to temporarily boost employment. But in the long run, reality sets in. The curve turns into a stark vertical line. Monetary policy simply cannot permanently buy lower unemployment. If you keep trying to force it, eventually you just end up with the exact same natural rate of unemployment, but now you're strapped with much higher inflation. Not exactly a great deal.
All right, part four, expectations and shocks.
Take a look at this equation. It is absolutely key to unlocking the whole puzzle. Notice that variable right at the end there, expected inflation. Think about it. If everyday people suddenly expect higher prices next year, what do? They demand higher wages today to keep up. And when that happens, it actually shifts the entire short-run Phillips curve to the right. Almost instantly, policymakers are handed a dramatically worse set of options to choose from.
And expected inflation isn't the only thing that can shift the curve. Huge, sudden supply shocks can do it too. Take the 1974 OPEC oil crisis. A massive real-world shock ran right through the global system, causing aggregate supply to just plummet. The result was a brutal chain reaction. Output fell off a cliff, prices skyrocketed, and the short-run Phillips curve was violently shoved to the right. The economy found itself trapped in a total nightmare scenario, simultaneously higher unemployment and higher inflation. It's a highly toxic economic cocktail we now call stagflation.
Finally, part 5, the cost of curing inflation.
So, say you're stuck with deep, entrenched inflation. To cure it, central bankers have to deliberately hit the brakes and slow the economy down, dragging it back down along that short-run Phillips curve. In the early 1980s, U.S. Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker had to confront this head-on. He ran right into a very painful reality known as the sacrifice ratio. Simply put, this is the amount of annual economic output that has to be permanently lost just to reduce inflation by a single percentage point.
And the standard historical estimate for this sacrifice ratio? It's a staggering 5. Just think about the sheer scale of that. If a country wants to reduce its inflation rate by just 1%, it has to wipe out 5% of its annual output to get there. When Volcker realized he needed to reduce inflation by roughly 6 percentage points, well, the math suggested sacrificing about 30% of annual output. It's a completely agonizing, grueling economic transition.
But hold on, there actually is a silver lining here. Modern economists point out that human expectations aren't just stubbornly looking backward at what happened yesterday. We are rational. We look to the future. So if a central bank steps up and makes a highly credible, unbreakable commitment to achieving low inflation, and people actually believe them, it can trigger rational expectations to adjust way faster. If the public buys into the strategy, inflation expectations drop quickly, and that dreaded sacrifice ratio, it can actually be significantly reduced.
So as we review all these historical realities and models, we're left with a really provocative question to chew on. Knowing the brutal math of the sacrifice ratio, are you willing to induce immense temporary economic pain? Pain that is very often borne by the most vulnerable workers, just to achieve the permanent stability of zero inflation. It is quite literally the ultimate trade-off that every single central bank wrestles with. And now you know exactly why. Thanks for joining us for this explainer. We'll see you next time.